You know, the state of film criticism and general online discourse over films and various people's opinions on those films has really kind of got me down in the last few years. Basically, ever since the COVID era, it's just gotten a little ugly and out of hand and not fun, if I'm being honest. And I almost didn't sit down here to do my review of the new James Gunn Superman, at least in video form, because I posted a little blurb on Twitter and spoke to some people I know personally about it after I saw it, and just even their response and how serious they take this shit is kind of alarming, because I don't take it that seriously. There's actors and directors and film franchises that I hold near and dear to my heart, but if somebody doesn't like one of those films or actors, I don't get it and I don't understand it, but I also don't hold a personal grudge against that person for their opinion. I've just never looked at movies or music or anything else that is inherently subjective in that way. But then I thought to myself, I've actually had people, and it's kind of crazy, reach out to me and say, hey, what do you think of Superman? Are you going to be doing a review of Superman? I've seen XYZ that I follow and they've done reviews. One person I trust is negative. Another one's down the middle. You know, maybe they're looking to me as a tiebreaker. I've had quite a few people hit me up about that. And I thought, for whatever reason, people care about my opinion on film and on movies, which is obviously what this channel is here for. Let's get into it. Superman, a journalist in Metropolis, embarks on a journey to reconcile his Kryptonian heritage with his human upbringing as Clark Kent. Obviously just simply titled Superman, directed by James Gunn, starring David Corenswet as the new Superman in that titular role, and also, of course, Clark Kent. We also have Rachel Brosnahan here, Nicholas Hoult, Nathan Fillion, Isabella Marcet, and a host of others, which is something that I'm going to get into as we get a little deeper into my review here. This is intended to be a spoiler-free review. I will not be spoiling any specific plot devices that I may have liked or may have had issues with, but I will be talking generally about the flow and the theme, the pacing of the film. So if that's something that you don't want to know, because that could kind of sway you as what the film's going to possibly look like or how it's going to play out, then I would recommend not watching this review until you've seen it. So this is going to be kind of an awkward review for me, honestly, because of what I said in my cold open about the discourse around it. And I think that this movie is the poster child for that right now. But you could insert any big budget, high profile film, especially if it's in a beloved franchise like DC Comics. You know, James Gunn comes over here infamously from the MCU to now start his new DC EU. And this is the first iteration we're getting under the James Gunn kind of umbrella. I took Hope with me to the theater. I also took my 11, almost 12-year-old son with me to the theater, which is something else I'm going to touch on towards the end of this review. But going all the way back to the 70s and 1980s especially, I can remember seeing Christopher Reeve as Superman. And I want to bring that up not as a comparison to this, because we're over 40 years removed from those types of films, but I do want to point them out to kind of make my point here as to why this movie did not fully work for me, unfortunately. And the main reason being is because of the genre that it exists in now in 2025. Which, frankly, I don't blame James Gunn. I don't blame the DC. I definitely don't blame any of the performers like Corenswet or Brosnahan in this film. But the overload of sound and visuals and CGI for sure, explosions, buildings crumbling. And I was very hopeful for this movie because I thought James Gunn and everybody involved, and I love the casting of Corenswet, I thought we would maybe dial it back to the same iteration of this character and other superheroes of similar note in the 1980s into the 90s with the Tim Burton Batman films, where we're focused on the character, the titular character, whether it's Superman, Superman 2, or, you know, they didn't get super clever back then with the Christopher Reeve Supermans, or Batman, Batman Returns, Batman Forever even. You know, these are the character. Other characters might be introduced, a la Robin in some of the Batman iterations, but mostly it's villains or side characters that don't get a ton of screen time in those films. And for anybody that's seen the Christopher Reeve films, you know that Superman was a hero who was ripped from the original pages of the comic, where his entire existence on Earth, at least, was to help humanity, to be an aid for them in kind of their everyday lives, essentially. It was never like a super convoluted plot of a portal opening to a different universe, and there were multiple layers of this villain and a different version of a villain in this universe and on this planet. It was never that deep. Now, it could have been because the writing had not evolved and technology had not evolved enough. Science fiction stories in general, perhaps. But when I'm talking about my preferential viewing of these types of films, I much more responded to that because he was an everyday hero, regardless of the superpowers that he also had in those films. I'm speaking specifically really of the Christopher Reeve films, and I also kind of have the Michael Keaton Batman in my mind when I'm saying that. You know, everything I saw on this James Gunn Superman, from an action spectacle, stunt coordination, action set piece in this movie, while there were some that I enjoyed, none of them, and we're talking in 2025 with, I'm assuming, everything at their disposal in terms of budget, technology, VFX, all of it was there. None of it reached an excitement level for me of scenes that we got that were practically done. At least 99% practically done, because it was in the 70s and 80s, of scenes like Christopher Reeve Superman saving Margot Kidder's Lois Lane from an impending earthquake in California, or saving a dumb kid from playing on the railing at Niagara Falls and slipping to his certain death, or even a terrorist attack on the Eiffel Tower in Paris, and he swoops in to save Lois yet again in that scenario. But my point is, it's all inherently realistic and believable. They're all events that can happen to any given person that, if you're a normal human, could be catastrophic. And you have this alien known as Superman who can come in and save you and save the day. I will say up front, I think all the performances in this film, especially those main characters, which is really Luthor, obviously Superman, and Lois Lane, portrayed by Rachel Brosnahan. We have a lot of supporting roles also, but those are the three main screen time getters in this movie, and they all did a great job in their roles. I will say that. But again, the approach and the screenwriting and the way Gunn is presenting, because you got to remember, this is the first one. So the way he's presenting this material, I didn't like, and I didn't agree with. And like I said, that's okay, because I realize it's just not for me. I prefer a much more simple approach to this character. I'm not even just reviewing Superman, this movie. I'm reviewing it as an idea or as a future franchise, because when you go back to the 80s and 90s that I've been talking about with the Tim Burton Batmans and with the Christopher Reeve Supermans, and it was like, we're making this movie. This is Superman, or this is Superman 2, Richard Donner, or whatever. This is it. The audiences respond to it, which they typically did. Same thing with Batman in '89, Batman Returns, franchises like the MCU and what we're getting here with the DCU, and even the Zack Snyderverse. Even though it wasn't my thing, I know there's legions of fans that love the connectivity to all of those films, and in some cases TV shows even, and other comic books, and everything kind of ties together. And this universe exists, and if you're a super fan of it, you have a strong connection to it. I'm not in that boat, but I'm extremely happy for them. What bothers me as a film critic when I'm talking about James Gunn Superman is I feel like one of my gripes with it, and what brought my score down about it a little bit, is that I know, not just because the news has reported it, watching the movie, I know that this is more to them than just this film. It wasn't about this 2-hour project. It was about what they're going to do with it going forward and how it's going to snowball into the next one. And then we're going to get a spinoff of, Guy Gardner or Hawkgirl. And then, something's going to show up on, I don't even know what service would be affiliated with DC. But the trap they fall into is setting up that lore and creating that universe, as opposed to just making a movie. Tim Burton in '89, he wanted to make Batman '89. He made it his own. He made it visually a Burton film. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, definitely in the superhero genre. He just wanted to make that movie. He didn't even want to do a sequel. They paid him an exorbitant amount of money. He did Batman Returns, and then he left the franchise because it's special when you get a singular story around a singular character. In James Gunn's Superman, we do get Corenswet as a brilliant depiction of Superman. I think he was well cast, and I loved his performance, but there's too much other stuff going on. There's something beautiful in the simplistic hero story that I don't think you need all that extra noise, and I'm saying that figuratively, but in this case, literally. And also, we saw it in the Dolby Cinema, so I feel like my ears are still ringing. So this review is not so much a knock on this movie specifically, but more so on the path that we've gone down in this genre, and this is just the latest installment, and unfortunately the latest example of what I don't like about this genre currently. There are some good things in here. David Corenswet is a perfect Superman. The casting was sublime. Rachel Brosnahan is a baddie. I've always thought that, and she was another perfect casting choice as Lois Lane here. She really harnessed a little bit of the kind of modern seductress, but also mixed with that kind of quirky beauty that we got from Margot Kidder in the 80s. I love that kind of marriage of those two different types of personalities. So I thought she was great. Nicholas Hoult did well as Lex Luthor. I just didn't like the way his character was written because, like I said, I prefer the Gene Hackman style Lex Luthor, where it's kind of slapsticky and just over the top, but you still have to kind of keep your eye on him because he is so smart and he does have these ways about him of getting things done. But you're never like threatened by him necessarily, at least from the POV of Superman. And I don't read the comics, so if it's coming straight from the comics, that's fine. But as a movie critic, when you're judging a film, of course it's going to help if you know the source material or, you know, different innuendos or Easter eggs. But I don't feel like you should have to know that in order to enjoy it or not enjoy it. You know, you can critique it based on the frames in the film, regardless of what is connected to it, which is another reason why a lot of the films in the MCU, especially as of late, just don't hit with me, because if I didn't see 2 films before it, I might not be able to enjoy something I'm watching in this film. And I don't like that type of storytelling because I feel like you're excluding way too many people, which I would put myself in the group of those being excluded. My favorite parts of James Gunn's Superman were really the quiet moments. There's a scene in the film or a sequence when Lois and Clark go back to Kansas to basically stay with his folks for I think a night or a couple nights. It was very reminiscent of some of the old films. There's no loud score, punk rock music. There's no James Gunnisms of cameras swirling around in a circle during a fight sequence. It's just quiet on the farmland, and I thought it was very poignant, very beautiful. There's also a scene in the first act of the film, which they actually showed in one of the trailers, at least a snippet of it, where Lois is interviewing Clark as Superman. And, you know, she knows he's Superman and nobody else does, so she has that little insider track to talk to him about a conflict that he's been assisting with. And that was a very real, grounded, kind of quiet scene in the movie. I love those scenes when we do get that character development and the depth to these folks that we're following, not just these loud, bombastic sequences of various superhero action. When it comes to supporting performances, I think, honestly, the Justice Gang, which I didn't even know that was a thing, I guess that's ripped from the comics also. We don't really get enough time with those characters, and the fact that they're in this movie to begin with kind of is one of the things I'm saying I don't like, but the fact that we met them in this movie and they are in the film and I'm judging them, I did kind of like those characters. I think it's Edi Gathegi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but he plays Mr. Terrific in the film. He's one of the Justice Gang who has a pretty neat superpower that I didn't know anything about this character from. I didn't even know he existed. But he steals the show in the supporting role. He was definitely the funniest and the most charming of them. I will also give a huge shout out to Nathan Fillion's Green Lantern, or Guy Gardner here, which I know is like a dorky version of the Green Lantern that we got in some versions of the comics, with the bowl cut, and he's older and makes a lot of dad jokes. But he was also very charming and very funny in his role. We didn't get enough of Hawkgirl, which was portrayed by Isabella Marced, but she already got all the screen time she needed in Madam Web. Am I right? I mean, that was, talk about superhero films that missed. So I think the easiest summary of this review is that if this is your cup of tea, if you like the current state of superhero films on the big screen, these like comic books brought to life where you're dropped into the comic edition that you're reading, but this time visually, and you're just dropped in, you know, which is how comics read, actually. It's never like once upon a time, and then it's always just like, and on the streets of Metropolis, you know, Hawkgirl was fighting a giant I mean, that's how it starts in the comics. So I appreciate the authenticity there also in the storytelling. It's just not for me. But if it is for you, I think you're going to like this. It missed the mark for me, but that's just based on my preference. And my expectation was that James Gunn was going to pull back a little on the gas pedal from what we had been getting, well, in the MCU, which is not related, but in the MCU, and even in the Zack Snyderverse, like, it was too full throttle, too much screaming, too much noise, too much of these like ugly CGI. And I was hopeful James Gunn's going to take the pedal and just dial it back a little bit and give us a nice quiet hero, introduce him, have some of those poignant moments that I was used to from the old days, and then lead that into whatever it leads into, because we know it's going to make $1 billion regardless. I was just mid on it, and it definitely did not live up to expectations for me, but that's my opinion. You know, it's a 92 or something like that on Rotten Tomatoes as I'm sitting here. It may even go up this weekend when people see it. That's great. You know, I'm not going to like every movie that the masses like. I'm going to like some movies that the masses dislike. In fact, that happens often, believe it or not. So I'm usually on the other side of things. Before I give you my score out of 10, I do want to mention my son Logan went to see this movie with me. He also has very minimal knowledge of Superman, at least in cinema. I showed him Superman 1 and Superman 2 from the 70s and early 80s when he was young. He was like 8 years old maybe, so he barely remembers it. But, you know, that was goofy to him because he's on YouTube all the time and on his iPad, and he sees, you know, MCU stuff. So it's dated, you know, especially in the effects and the costuming and all that. And I understand that. We're watching the credits because I knew there, by the way, there's an end credit scene, just so you guys know. There's 2 of them, actually, mid and end. So we're waiting, the credits are rolling, and ask him what he thinks. His eyes are lit up, and he says 5 out of 5. It's great. I mean, he has Letterboxd. He's talking about giving it a 5 on Letterboxd. He was like, it's great. He's clapping at the end. He was giving an applause. Some of the other crowd was too. We were in a pretty packed theater today. That's what it's all about, man. That's what it's all about. You know, I told him on the way home, I was like, man, I wish I liked it as much as you did. I feel like you liked it as much as I liked Superman 2 when I saw it at, 10 years old. So he's almost 12. So I just want to point that out, that this movie can have the same impact on kids today that the Christopher Reeve Superman films or even the Batman films from Burton that I mentioned had on kids at that age back then. And that's important to me. I don't want our kids to not have that experience of these comic book characters brought to life and being able to cherish them as something special. And that I'm not going to sway my son one way or the other to not like something. So I was thrilled that he enjoyed it as much as he did. I just wanted to point that out. Even though I'm about to give you my score, my son Logan would drop a 10 on it. James Gunn's Superman, for me, is going to get a 5 out of 10, not a 5 out of 5 like Logan said. If you love superhero cinema since the whole Avengers Endgame and the MCU iteration, you will like this, especially if you have any kind of connection to the Superman character. It just didn't work for me for all the reasons that hopefully I explained on this video. Let me know what you guys thought of James Gunn's Superman down below if you saw it, or are you planning on seeing it? What's your level of excitement? And how excited are you, or are you not, after seeing it, for James Gunn's extended DCEU? I would love to know that down below as well. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll see you next time in the garage.